Well done. Now we will share screen. Okay. Okay. All right. We are continuing our deep dive into visualization meditation. It's wonderful, it's useful, and it's something that we do all the time. Let's get really good at it. We'll also continue our study of mindfulness and compare it to concentration. That's also key. Understanding the yin-yang relationship between the two will help you meditate better and develop concentration and focus. Okay, so how did we get to this point? Just to backtrack, we did hear from Rabbi Kaplan about visualization in forging a deeper relationship between a man and a woman, that was our starting point, and we're trying to explore the mechanics of that and what's involved actually in doing that. So that's why we're taking this deep dive, because that's a very deep topic. We branched out a little bit to find out further what he's talking about when he describes visualization meditation. And we talked about the double technique of engraving and hewing, where in your mind you're seeing whatever object you're looking at on the screen of your mind engraved there, which gives it a sense of permanence and steadfastness. That's the engraving, and the hewing is chopping away, brushing away anything that interferes. And what this is emphasizing is the powers of your mind, that you can tell yourself, I am seeing a certain letter or whatever it is on the screen of my mind, and it's engraved there. So it's not going to leave. So we're using our ideas about how the world works in our mind. I mean, if you saw an engraving, an engraving is somebody cuts out something in wood or something. If you saw that, it would have a sense of permanence there. So you're transferring that sense of permanence to what you're looking at in your mind. If you're saying to yourself, that image or that letter is engraved in the screen of my mind, that means something to you, just as if something was engraved in the world outside your mind. So that helps you relate to it and give it a sense of permanence. So you can see what we're trying to do is treat what's happening in your mind the same way you treat what's happening in the outside world. If something is permanent in the outside world, you can treat it as being permanent, so to speak, in your mind. It has that same reaction from you. That's what this is about. Treating your mind as a place that you inhabit, just like the world that you inhabit. You can do that. You're going places. It's really interesting stuff. Okay. Then we took a few steps with Bali Gill, who wrote about happiness and well-being and work and life, getting started in visualization. And Bali Gill mentioned something super important, which is energizing your vision. So you're visualizing something, and it has a sense of permanence, and you're hewing things away. But what you're looking at, you've got to feel it. You've got to engage with it. And it's not just looking at something. You're not just like watching a movie. When you're at a movie theater, you're not engaging with the screen. Here, you might be feeling something to some extent, okay, and it's moving you. This is that kind of experience on steroids because it's inside your own mind. So you're not just watching it outside in the world, but it's inside your mind. Therefore, you're able to almost touch it in your mind. That's where you want to be. It's got to be like an almost tactile experience in your mind. You can get there. That's energizing it. Okay. So then to give examples of this, we read a little bit from Maxwell, Maltz, and Psycho-Cybernetics. And he talked about mental pictures offering us an opportunity to practice new traits and attitudes, which otherwise we could not. So he talked about how golfers and pianists and people in all walks of life are using visualization to practice. Now you can understand how real they're making it. If you can have a pianist who practices a piece composition in their mind and gets better at playing it, you can imagine how real they're making it in their mind. That's a big deal. That's what we're talking about. And it takes a lot of work. So most people can't do this at first blush. So you got to do it 10,000 times, but it's worth it because this is like the center of how we're experiencing things. We're visualizing things in our mind. So you put in the effort and you get a lot better than this at this. Okay. We then talked about in this little essay called Your Secret Blueprint, we talked about this snapback effect, meaning he's emphasizing self-image. So that, let's go back to the pianist for a second. If that pianist attempted to have this mental practice session and play this piece, but inside he's like, I really suck as a pianist, I'm not really good. And that's what he's thinking to himself, because some teacher way back when he was a kid said, you're really not going to amount to stuff, and he internalized that. If he's trying to do this sophisticated composition in his mind, he's not going to do it well. That makes sense because he doesn't believe in himself. He has a self-image that is constraining him, that's limiting him. But if he had a self-image that says, well, I'm a good student of the piano and I have God-given talents, and I'm thankful I can make them work, and I can every time my fingers hit those keys, that is a step towards getting better and better, because I feel like I have this potential to be really good. If that's how he looks at himself, then yeah, he's going to sit down in this mental piano session practice and he's going to get better. So Maxwell Maltz is hitting on this like really key point. If you think you're bad, yep, you're right. If you think you're good, yep, you're right. So therefore, you have to have the right image of yourself, the right definition of yourself, in order to have a very successful outcome in what you're visualizing. So to use, and by the way, this is something that's emphasized by Matt Fury and all these world famous gurus on growth and development. It's really true. So let's get back for a second to the case I mentioned from Sports Illustrated a few weeks ago, where there's a kid who had cystic fibrosis that wanted to play football. He had this ambition of playing football. He's confined to a wheelchair. So this guy, if he attempted to imagine himself as an able-bodied linebacker playing for the New York Giants, it would be a real chore for him, because deep down he's thinking like, oh my God, I can't even get out of this wheelchair. It's not going to be a successful visualization. And he knew that. So that's why, as the story went, he pivoted, and instead of visualizing himself playing football, he visualized himself as a coach, as a kicking coach. And he became a real expert in how to kick the football and became a tutor to a lot of the really good place kickers. So he had this impression of himself that was pretty realistic, and he had to adjust his vision accordingly so that he would have a successful visualization. So, so this is really important. You have to have a really um, strong definition of yourself that lends itself to energizing a visualization of where you want to be. Okay. And the whole and the whole notion of, well, I could be anything I want is not really true. There's limits to that. So you've got to, you got to act accordingly. Okay. So that brings us to where we're going to be today. In this essay about success from the inside out, not the outside in, what we just discussed is a good feedback, a good feed into that. So let's see what he has to say. What does he say? We are right here. He says, one of the reasons it seems so difficult for a person to change habits, personality, or way of life has been that nearly all efforts at change have been directed to the circumstances of the self, so to speak, rather than to the center. Numerous patients, now he's speaking as somebody who was a cosmetic surgeon that did cosmetic surgery on the rich and famous in the 50s and I guess before then. And so when he says numerous patients, he's talking about those people that went to him for body beautiful, face beautiful, body beautiful men and women. Numerous patients have said to me something like the following: if you are talking about positive thinking, I've tried that before, and it just doesn't work for me. However, a little questioning invariably brings out that these individuals employed positive thinking or attempted to employ it either on particular external circumstances or on some particular habit or character defect. I will get that job. I will be more calm and relaxed in the future. This business venture will turn out right for me, and so on. But they never thought to change their thinking of the self that was to accomplish these things. This is making sense. I will get that job. You can be as positive as you want, but that's something not in your control. What are you going to do? Feed the mind of the guy that's you're gonna like with your brain waves affect the thinking of the guy that we want to hire you? I mean, this is barking up the wrong tree. Positive thinking cannot be used effectively as a patch to the same old self-image. In fact, it is literally impossible to really think positively about a particular situation as long as you hold a negative concept of self. Numerous experiments have shown that once the concept of self is changed, other things consistent with the new concept of self are accomplished easily and without strain. I know a lot of guys who do things like, well, I know I need money, or I knew I need a job, and say, well, I'm just gonna keep going to shul. I'm gonna keep walking little old ladies across the street. I'm gonna give tzedakah. I'm gonna do all this. They're doing this external things, but they're not working on that part of themselves that hasn't gotten the job yet. And what they really need to do is improve themselves as a job seeker, as a person in the marketplace. They got to focus on that. All these other things are deviations from what they should be focusing on. Not to say that any of these other things are bad, but they're far afield from what this guy wants to accomplish. One of the earliest and most convincing experiments along this line was conducted by the late Prescott Leckie, one of the pioneers in self-image psychology. Leckie conceived of the personality as a system of ideas, all of which must be consistent with each other. Ideas that are inconsistent with the system are rejected. not believed, and not acted on. Ideas that seem to be consistent with the system are accepted. At the very center of this system of ideas, the keystone or the base in which all else is built, is the individual's self-image or his conception of himself. Lecky was a school teacher and had an opportunity to test his theory on thousands of students. He theorized that if a student had trouble learning a certain subject, it could be because, from the student's point of view, it would be inconsistent for him to learn it. Lecky believed, however, that if the student could be induced to change his self-definition, his learning ability should also change. This proved to be the case. One student who misspelled 55 words out of 100 and flunked so many subjects that he lost credit for a year made a general average of 91 the next year and became one of the best spellers in school. A girl who was dropped from one college because of poor grades entered Columbia and became a straight-A student. A boy who was told by a testing bureau that he had no aptitude for English won honorable mention the next year for a literary prize. The trouble with these students was not that they were dumb or lacking in basic aptitudes. The trouble was an inadequate self-image, such as, I don't have a mathematical mind, or I'm just naturally a poor speller. How many people do you know walk around thinking like that? A lot. They identified with their mistakes and failures. Instead of saying, I failed that test, factual and descriptive, they concluded, I am a failure. Instead of saying, I flunked that subject, they said, I am a flunk out. My own files, that's Dr. Maltz, contain case histories just as convincing. The woman who was so afraid of strangers that she seldom ventured out of the house and who now makes her living as a public speaker. The salesman who had already prepared a letter of resignation because he just wasn't cut out for selling, and 6 months later was number one man on a force of 100 salespeople. The minister who was considering retirement because nerves and the pressure of preparing a sermon every week were getting him down, and who now delivers an average of 3 outside talks a week in addition to his weekly sermons, and doesn't know he has a nerve in his body. Following Dr. Lecky's breakthrough thinking on this subject, born from observation, as well as my own observations and thoughts chronicled in the earlier editions of this book, a mountain of more sophisticated scientific research and anecdotal evidence has led to the acceptance of the controlling self-image by most of the academic psychological community. Yeah. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think you don't deserve success, you won't get it. If you think you do deserve success, you'll get it, type of thing. So again, the importance here is that you don't want to pull the plug out of your own visualization of a better future or whatever you want, because if you don't really believe in yourself, you're not going to really believe in the future. So that is like the real big point. Okay, controlling self-image. So just to add to that, remember that we said earlier, and he's going to go into it, that the self-image is created excuse me, through a combination of 3 factors that interact. One of the factors is repetition, meaning that you're growing up and people keep saying, you're dumb, you're dumb, you're dumb, don't be a dummy, you're a dumb, dumb, blah, 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 blah. So you walk away thinking, I'm a dummy. Or an authority figure says that, and all they have to do is say it once. Your parents, or teachers, or coach, you're never going to amount to anything. Okay. So why should I try? That is a big thing. And the third factor is an intense experience, maybe a trauma, where you try to do something and you fail, and there's so much on the line, you don't come through, and you walk away saying, I'm no good. So what does that mean in terms of fixing that? What it means is you use the same 3 factors to work in your favor. You use self-talk and the assistance of supportive people to reinforce, to repetitively keep saying, no, you're on target. No, you're on target. You're good. You go to somebody you really respect, an authority figure, whoever it is, and what do you think? How am I doing? And they give you a big vote of confidence. That means a heck of a lot. You believe more in yourself. And the third one, some intense experience, you prove something. It could be a martial arts test. It could be climbing a mountain. It could, whatever your thing is, it could be riding a bike a mile for the first time since you were 7 years old. Whatever it is, you show, yeah, I can do this. And that changes your self-image. And that's what we're talking about. So, getting back to Rabbi Kaplan, all right, so here we started this whole thing about visualization with him talking about visualization and intimacy between a man and a woman. I mean, if they're having problems, visualization is not going to work, clearly. Or if one of them is gun ho and the other one's like, oh, I don't deserve happiness because ever since I was a little kid, my mother kept saying, oh, you're never going to be happy. You're a miserable guy. Then, you're going to have a lot of trouble engaging because you don't feel you deserve it. This kind of stuff. So it's pointing that this kind of work on yourself that we're taking a deep dive into is the key to making this stuff work. And if you get all the pieces in place in terms of who you think you are, then you can go for it with this type of visualization because you're not going to be resisting it internally. So now I just want to mention, if you recall, one of the examples that Rabbi Kaplan gave here, Jacob and the deep meditation, that was an example of it. It's a Torah story, and it's about Jacob negotiating with his father-in-law Lavan. They're going to part ways. Jacob wants an inheritance. He wants property. He wants animals, and they make a deal. And the deal is that only Jacob's going to end up with the only ones that have a speckled coat, specks, coloring on their fur. And at the time, there weren't any that had this. So Jacob did some kind of genetic engineering mechanism, and it produced offspring that had these specks. And that's how he got this inheritance from his father-in-law. So you can imagine the self-image of somebody that can do that. They've got to really believe like they're an Eved Hashem, a servant of God, and they can tap into all kinds of powers. I mean, just think of what their definition of themselves is, in order to be able to tap into that kind of powers and visualize this happening, visualize them doing this genetic engineering type thing, which is hard to comprehend, but the Torah kind of says it flat out. That's quite a self-definition. So it just shows how high you can go by doing this. If you have all this information like we're discussing, then at some point you can get very sophisticated in your idea of who you are and what you think is possible and what you envision yourself doing. So hopefully we'll be able to understand this further because it seems like it's very important stuff. Okay, so that's Maxwell Maltz. Okay. Snap back. There we go. Okay, now we're going to pivot to mindfulness versus concentration. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about what Stephen Siebold says. And it's going to show you how prevalent is the teachings, how prevalent are the teachings that Bhante is giving us about mindfulness. This is what Stephen Siebold says. Again, he's a coach, business coach. He coaches top performers in fields and getting top performance. This is what he says. The world class embraces, hold on a second. Let's get right here. Right here, right. The world class embraces metacognition. And he starts with a quote. He says, "Of course we become what we think about. The real question is, do we know what we are thinking about?" And he goes on, "When it comes to thoughts, feelings, and attitudes, the masses are heavily influenced by external forces, like a pinball being bounced around from bumper to bumper. Their outer world determines their inner world. World-class thinkers are just the opposite. Knowing their thoughts control their feelings, the great ones have adopted the habit of thinking about what they think about. Psychologists refer to this as metacognition. This championship habit enables the performer to get to the root of the thoughts that bring about both positive and negative feelings. Once the performer is aware of the thoughts that are ultimately creating his results, he has the power to change any thought he chooses. In essence, metacognition enables the performer to take control of his thought process. This makes the champion's reality directly opposite of the masses, in that the great one's inner world determines their outer world. In other words, the results they achieve on the outside are dictated by the thoughts they have on the inside. The masses are victims of their own thoughts. They have the same potential for greatness as the pros do, yet are simply not paying attention to what they are allowing to enter their minds. And the results are disastrous. Meanwhile, the world class is thriving on upgraded thoughts that are manifesting tremendous results. They know that the better they become at controlling their thoughts, the better their results will be, and it all begins with metacognition. Now, boys and girls, can you think of another word to describe this besides metacognition? It's mindfulness. He just described mindfulness, which is what we've been talking about for almost a year and a half. Mindfulness. You know what you're thinking. You can see the good, bad, and the ugly. You're aware of it all, and you're going to choose to think this. You have developed the skill of knowing what's going on in your mind and choosing to think this and not that. That is what he's talking about. And you have to develop mindfulness to know what the choices are and to see, oh, I'm thinking like really bad stuff now. I got to stop that. It's getting me down. Or why don't I think about this? That'll pick me up. He's saying that the top achievers in all fields have that skill. And that's what we've been talking about this whole time. So the mindfulness is making us aware, ooh, that's what I'm thinking. Ooh, that's what I'm thinking. The mindfulness is helping us understand our reactions. Ooh, when I think of that, I feel really bad. Oh, when I think of that, I feel really good. And the powers of concentration that we're developing are allowing us to say, I'm aware of all this, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm going to choose that good one to think about now. I'm going to focus on that. That's how mindfulness is working in conjunction with concentration. The mindfulness is letting you see the whole truth and nothing but the truth about what's going on in here. And the concentration is something like, no, I want to think about that. That makes me feel good. That makes me feel positive. That makes me feel encouraged. I'm going to think that, not this other stuff. I'm going to hew it away. That's what Siebold is talking about. Yet another bit of evidence that what we're talking about is the right stuff. So let's just wrap it up a little bit and have Bhante emphasize this point for us. This is what he says. Mindfulness simply accepts whatever is there. If you want to grow in mindfulness, patient acceptance is the only route. Mindfulness grows only one way, by continuous practice of mindfulness, by simply trying to be mindful. And that means being patient. The process cannot be forced and it cannot be rushed. It proceeds at its own pace. Concentration and mindfulness go hand in hand in the job of meditation. Mindfulness directs the power of concentration. Mindfulness is the manager of the operation. Concentration furnishes the power by which mindfulness can penetrate into the deepest level of the mind. Their cooperation results in insight and understanding. These must be cultivated together in a balanced manner. Just a bit more emphasis is given to mindfulness because mindfulness is the center of meditation. The deepest levels of concentration are not really needed to do the job of liberation. Liberation meaning freeing yourself from your own mind, from all this stuff that you keep doing to yourself. Still, a balance is essential. Too much awareness without calm to balance it will result in a wildly oversensitized state similar to abusing LSD. Too much concentration without a balancing ratio of awareness will result in the stone Buddha syndrome, where you get so tranquilized that you sit there like a rock. Both of these are to be avoided. The initial stages of mental cultivation are especially delicate. Too much emphasis on mindfulness at this point will actually retard the development of concentration. When getting started in meditation, one of the first things you will notice is how incredibly active the mind really is. His tradition calls this phenomenon monkey mind. If you ever done yoga, I know we got yoga people, they always talk about monkey mind. The Tibetan tradition likens it to a waterfall of thought. If you emphasize the awareness function at this point, there will be so much to be aware of that concentration will be impossible. Don't get discouraged. This happens to everybody. And there is a simple solution. Put most of your effort into one point in this at the beginning. That's why we just keep focusing on the breath moving in and out of the nose. This way, we develop the skills to just pinpoint there and not get carried away with all the stuff. Tough it out. A couple of months down the track, and you will have developed concentration power. At this point, I'm assuming that everybody that's been coming to class at least has been able to keep going back to the breath. I'm not saying that I expect you to be focusing on your breath for 3 hours continually, but you develop the aware, yep, I lost it, got to go back to the breath, got to go back to the breath, got to back. And the awareness that you have that you lost focus there's shorter intervals. Like maybe a year ago, it took you this long to realize, I got sidetracked, got to go back to the breath. By this time, if you've been putting in any kind of practice time, it should only take this amount of time before you realize, right, I got to go back to the breath. That's what we're looking for here. A couple of months down the track and you will have developed concentration power. Then you can start pumping your energy into mindfulness. Do not, however, go far with concentration. Go so far that you find yourself going into a stupor. All right, so this is okay, fine. Okay. So again, Siebold and Bhante are talking about the same thing. You develop mindfulness so that you're aware of everything and you're aware that you're aware of it, and you're meaning that you're aware of the impact on it. I'm thinking of a pizza that makes me feel good. I'm thinking of a Twinkie that makes me feel bad because I know it'll kill me. okay, you know all this stuff. And it's like, all right, well, I'm going to think about pizzas now. The Twinkies, as nice as they are, they're not even food. Okay, so you know this. You need mindfulness to be able to be aware of this. And then you use concentration to say, all right, I'm going to focus on this pizza pie, and I'm not going to focus on the Twinkies. You're making a choice here. And your emotional reaction, you're going to have the emotional reaction that you want. It's power for you. That is power for you. Okay. So you can see why we're continuing this. This is key stuff. And if you want to have really successful visualizations and visualize a great future, you got to be able to make these internal decisions about who you are and what's good for you. Otherwise, it ain't going to work. Okay. Margaret?